Welcome to this week's Urban Education Network Capital Update video. I'm Margaret Buckton, your UEN Executive Director. Well, we finished the first week of the 2026 legislative session, so today we're going to talk about the timetable and how to find your legislator, the governor's budget recommendations, including school aid and things impacting budget guarantee in charter schools. There are various property tax proposals out there, so we'll go through a couple of those, talk about what's next, what's coming soon, and some advocacy actions for the week. Well, the session timetable is part of the rules of the House and Senate. They haven't changed it, so they have a 100-day session that is scheduled for this year. And that doesn't mean they adjourn when that 100 days expires. That just means that legislators don't get paid per diem anymore, so they try and finish by that deadline. The first key funnel deadline is February 20th. That's the day by which a bill has to get out of a committee of its chamber of origin. So a House file has to get out of the House Education Committee, for example, and also the same thing in the Senate. Then they have to work toward March 20th when it's the opposite. A House file has to get out of a Senate committee. And those funnel deadlines are really important to winnow down the over 2,000 pieces of legislation that'll be introduced to about the 100, 150 that'll get to the governor's desk. Now, some of you may be new to the UEN and to this advocacy work, or just need a reminder, especially if you have new legislators, where to find information. If you go to the legislative website, thelegis.iowa.gov, and click on legislators, you can find out who your legislators are. And since I was talking to some folks from Fort Dodge this week, I picked Fort Dodge, selected this school district, and you can see Senator Tim Kryenbrink, who is the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. Representative Wendy Larson is new to representing House District 7, so welcome, Representative Larson. And of course, Representative Ann Meyer, who's been around for a while, also represents part of Fort Dodge. And then you can go down below to see who your federal representatives and senators are as well. If you click on that contact information for each legislator will come up. It'll also tell you what bills they sponsor and what committees they serve on. Well, we've got three sources of information that told us a lot about the governor's condition of the state's speech, her vision for Iowa, and the Legislative Services Agency's preliminary and subsequent analysis of the governor's budget documents. The Department of Management also puts out this condition of the state budget. And we're going to start first with school funding and the governor's recommendation. Governor Reynolds set a 2% increase in the per pupil amount for state supplementary assistance for fiscal 27. That is estimated to cost about $73 million for regular program district costs. But included in that is a new idea for the state to assume what would otherwise be the property taxes associated with a budget guarantee. That's $42.2 million. The governor included state funding to pay for that, which, if was used on SSA and a higher percentage than 2%, would achieve about the same objective. It also grows the categorical funds by 2% applied to the state cost per pupil for those categorical funds. That doesn't mean your teacher salary supplement district cost will go up by 2%. That 2% costs about provides about $22 million of extra capacity in state funding for all of the categoricals, and that really occurs because education savings account enrollment went up, even though statewide district enrollment went down. The governor also continues the cut of $25 million to the AEAs. And because that statewide enrollment is down 7,336 students, that 2% SSA really works out to a 1.47% increase in combined district cost. There are several other parts of school funding that are impacted by the SSA too. The education savings accounts appropriation goes up to almost $340 million. That's an increase of $22 million or 6.6% for that 2% SSA, plus the estimated growth in the number of students accessing the education savings accounts. Charter schools are also starting to become more common and are being implemented across the state. There's a $20 million appropriation for charter schools in fiscal 27. That pays for the enrollment of students who are new to the charter school. That's an increase of 66% compared to last year based on that growth in the numbers of students. And the Transportation Equity Fund also is estimated to grow that 2% by around $600,000. Now, education policies for public schools aren't very numerous in the governor's vision for Iowa. There are only two that are mentioned. One is banning food dyes in school lunch, and the other is putting into Iowa code the E-Verify and Save immigration background checks, and we're not even sure that impacts public schools. We'll have to watch. And the Department of Education has several other pre-filed bills, which I'll mention in just a minute. But in the education policy section of the governor's vision for Iowa, it's all about charter schools. She talks about enabling all state per pupil funding to follow students from public schools to charter school districts, ensuring charter school students can access concurrent enrollment or those college credit courses. Allowing charter school students to also participate in public school extracurricular activities, naming charter schools as approved settings for student teachers to get their student teacher practicum experience, and then also requiring charter schools to provide driver education for the students that are going to those charter schools. Well, it's not just school funding that's part of the governor's proposal. She also has a new property tax proposal that's out, but we're going to start first with the Senate's proposal on property tax reform that was introduced early this week. It's Senate Study Bill 3001. Most of this policy continues what was in last year's bill. So there are two new ideas. One of those is that homeowners who are 60 years of age or older with no mortgage would eventually pay no property taxes after a phase-in. There also is a larger, more generous homestead credit that would subtract from valuation of residential property. Some of the things that were in last year's bill, I'll just mention in brief. The state assumes the total cost of the school additional levy. That's $685 per student that's currently on local property taxes, and that's because the program sets 100% foundation level, and that's both for the regular program district cost and for special ed services. It's unclear whether more of that money is coming from the SAVE fund, the state penny for school infrastructure, or from the state general fund. The proposed limitations on management fund levy from last year are exactly the same, except they age all of those dates 1 year later. It limits the ability to levy more, but does not limit expenditures or tax rates. And then the plan also phases out residential and commercial rollbacks and limits voter-approved levies to 70% of the existing rate limitation. There's more information about this in your weekly report. So by contrast, the governor's recommendation is a little bit more modest. Most of the limitations on growth, like revenue growth or other things that are specific to valuation, really are about cities and counties, and it says does not apply to schools in several places. The things that would apply: moving the assessment schedule from every 2 years to every 3 years, limiting the overuse of tax increment financing districts. That's the language that's in the governor's vision, but it does require all of the taxes in a TIF that be collected for school districts and then sent to school districts. So there's no diversion of revenue to the TIF from schools. Also addressing the concept that senior citizens need some property tax relief. It freezes property tax bills for seniors age 65 and up in homes valued $350,000 and less. That's targeting a slightly different audience than the Senate's senior citizen tax relief. The last one on her bulleted list is really the most problematic. It accelerates the SAVE fund, the Secure and Advanced Vision for Education Fund, which is also the state penny sales tax, that funding stream to generate additional property tax relief. So let's talk about that for just a minute. In the current fiscal year, the SAVE is estimated to generate about $645 million. If SAVE revenues grow more than 2%, current law requires that additional funds go into the Property Tax Equity and Relief Fund to provide additional property tax relief. And they first buy down the highest additional levies in the state to the state average. That gives some tax relief to property poor districts. Then they buy up the foundation level, giving property tax relief across the system. For fiscal 2026, the SAVE pays $5 million first to the Department of Education for the Career and Technical Education Academies, and then money goes into property tax relief, $32 million for the adjusted additional levy, and $10 million for the foundation-based supplement. There's also a state general fund appropriation that beefs that up by $24 million more. The rest then goes to schools. So back in 2019, House File 546 estimated the timeline to get to that 30% property tax relief, and I think that's when they added the Career Academy's $5 million carve-out first. From that fiscal note was a spreadsheet that showed estimating growth in the SAVE fund, seeing how much that was going to get, how much of that was going to be over 2%. They figured that by about 2048, that they would be at 30% of the revenue from the SAVE fund providing property tax relief. That would be $332.6 million of property tax relief and $771 million going to schools. The governor's plan, instead of that gradual phase-in, is to really speed it up, and within 4 years to get to that 30%. It would go up to 15% of SAVE Fund by fiscal 27, up to 20% by 28, 25% by 29, 30% by fiscal year 2030. Now, depending on the SAVE growth, over $190 million of property tax relief would then happen that schools are currently depending on, I think over 175 school districts, for bonding capacity and obligations. Look for your talking points in your weekly report, and we'll be talking about this more as the legislature discusses the two proposals. And the House bill is supposed to be out early next week. So what's next? There were 18 bills introduced in House Education this week already and 22 in the Senate Education Committee. So before things can move, they have to hold a subcommittee. There are several of those scheduled for next week. There will be even more because they're required to have a 24-hour posting deadline, same kind of notice that you are for a school board meeting. Of those, we'll be paying attention and let you know how those subcommittees turn out. If you see anything on this list that you're really interested in, you can, of course, click on the links in your weekly report and even email us and provide us some feedback. What's coming soon, I say, or is it? The governor's SSA recommendation starts the clock ticking on the 30-day requirement in Iowa code that they have to set SSA within 30 days of the release of the governor's budget. That deadline is February 11th. Now, the legislature doesn't really have to follow their own laws. There's no consequence if they do. They use the legislative lingo of notwithstanding the requirement, and that means they're going to pass this bill, but this other law is not going to apply to it this time. They might want to wait, possibly to settle the eminent domain issue that many Republicans have said that they're not going to vote on anything else till that's done, or to wait for the Revenue Estimating Conference to set their revenue estimate in March. The legislature is bound to live within 99% of the expenditure limitation based on the lower of those two estimates, the one they just did in December or the one they did in March. It's important to note the one in December has a revenue growth estimate of 4.2% for fiscal 27, and I'll talk about why that's important in a second. This does set the stage and timeline for SSA advocacy. So advocacy actions are really important, and it's critical that we not accept the lower limits and just be lulled into some complacency and wait till they do it. You need to contact legislators right away and every week until we have a bill signed. I call this good lobbying, gentle persuasion applied relentlessly. Be nice about it, be supportive, ask what information they need, and then stay at it. The talking points. The governor's 2% recommendation is again below inflation. All 5 prior consecutive years have been below inflation, so you're losing purchasing power every year. Since enrollment has dropped statewide by over 7,000 students, it's even more important that districts have enough in order to adequately compensate staff, or there will be layoffs. The REC estimated that 4.2% increase in state revenues. Shouldn't schools receive the benefit of that revenue increase now that we're recovering from the big income tax cut that has really hampered those general fund revenues for a few years? The governor recommends $42 million to offset that budget guarantee property tax. If instead that $42 million actually funded a higher SSA rate, it would relieve most of the budget guarantee property tax in many districts, generate more funding for special education costs so special ed deficits would be less, and help districts pay mandated teacher salary minimums. If you just want to know how Iowa is keeping up with the rest of the nation, we've fallen further behind in per pupil expenditures. With the census data, we're now over $2,700 per student less than the national average. We rank 9th out of 12 Midwestern states and 34th in the nation in our per pupil expenditures. The teacher pay investments of the last couple of years are welcome, but they'll soon erode if regular school aid doesn't keep pace. You can see our website for advocacy resources, talking points, and data to help you make the case for adequate school funding. So on the UEN website, there are links for the issue briefs. Get that one on school funding right away. And we have a new one also on property tax relief that helps you have some principled conversations with your legislators about what they should be thinking about as they talk to each other, as they decide what's important to solve the property tax concerns that they have. Thanks to our UEN corporate sponsors. We appreciate their support and connection to UEN member school districts. Check out the corporate sponsor page on the UEN website for more information about how to access their services. If you have a company or service that you think would be supportive of UEN schools, please send them our way. So get to that UEN website. You can get the issue briefs, the weekly reports, calls to action, and more. Check out this week's detailed written report for all of the actions at the State House, including those many bills that were introduced into the education committees this week. We'll see you next time.